Here's a tip. If you're the federal government and you want to execute Luigi Mangione, how about actually obeying the law in order to do so? That's the message from Karen Agnifilo in her latest massive motion filed about the constitutionality of the death penalty. And at first I thought to myself, what is she going to offer more that hasn't already been said? Oh my God, she offers more. As I break down this legal document, hold on to your hats. It's going to be a little bit of a shout fest. I'll try to keep the F-bombs to a minimum. Let's do the legal breakdown now. Now, if you know my show already, you know that I get pretty heated about civil rights violations, about criminal defense, about the lack of the presumption of innocence until proven guilty in a court of law in this country, how the mainstream media tends to shape narrative and convict people in the court of public opinion before they've even stepped into a courtroom. And yeah, I talk fast, I get it. But the point being is that if you've seen my show before, you know that I take a long time to say a lot of things, and I shout and I yell and I drop a few F-bombs. So if you're new to this channel, hold on a little bit. I will try to keep it to a minimum, but when I get my piss and vinegar up, I'm going to start to unleash both barrels, like Karen Agnifilo. Only if you've seen Key and Peele, you know that they have the universal translator where like the fake Obama will come on there and like, today we did this, and the universal translator is like, bitch. That's going to be me today. I'm going to be like, bitch, and saying the shit that Karen Agnifilo was trying to say. But to be fair, Karen Agnifilo does just fine on her own. Now, what I want to show you today real quick before we get into this is the legal document on screen. And I'm going to scroll down just a bit here and see if I can do it. So it starts out with procedural and factual summary, which is quite lengthy. And then the rest of the document, starting on page 22, is the argument. So the way I'm going to do this today is I'm going to give you right now my first part, which is the procedural and factual summary. And it will be a long summary. I don't summarize well. Karen Agnifilo doesn't summarize well, but I'm even worse. Karen Agnifilo does tend to repeat herself, but for good reason. And then I'll repeat her both times she says it and then repeat it again in case you missed the point. That's the way I do things because I think the constitutional issues need to be addressed. And again, if you're the federal government and you're going to execute somebody using the law, how about you fucking try to obey the law in the process? That would be really super nice. I told you I was going to drop an F-bomb or two. I get fired up about these things. The point being is that when we get done with the procedural and factual summary, we will save the argument, I think, for bonus rants. I've done this before in the past when I have a really, really long rant to make, like I'm going to do today. I will do the main rant in under an hour if I can. Probably not going to happen. And then I will do two more probably episodes called bonus rant 1 and 2. That'll probably be member only content. And the way it's laid out is this. First, Karen is going to lay out in this first 20 pages the summary of what the whole argument was. And the argument is going to be taking those 20 pages and giving very, very specifics. It's as if, like, if you didn't get the point in the first 20 pages, let me fucking spell it out for you. Again, I will try to limit the F-bombs, but I'm not great at it because I'm fired up today. All right. So the argument is where she says, in case you missed the point, let me spell it out for you. And that takes the remainder of the 118 pages. So like almost 20 pages is the summary. And then the rest of the 100 pages is her basically opening up both barrels and saying, in case you missed it, here it is. Spelled out for you. And so I will do that spelled out for you part more in the bonus rants. All right, let's get right into it because I already have gone long-winded and you're ready to chomp at the bit. So let's get started. Again, it's funny because I highlight things that I think will be important to talk about. And whenever I'm doing specifically Karen Agnifilo's documents, I find that I end up highlighting the entire document, which almost makes the highlighting part be completely immaterial because if you're going to highlight every single word that's said, what's the point of highlighting? By the way, this is the same thing I tell my wife when we're watching a movie, which is that there's only a couple of hours in the movie. Every part of that dialogue is important. Do you think they put it in there for fluff? It's important. Pay attention. That same thing with the legal document. These documents, if it's in there, it's probably important. So we should take some time to digest this, especially if you believe in the presumption of innocence until proven guilty and you believe in a legal and transparent court system. Motion to dismiss the indictment and notice of intention. Now, by the way, she's going to point this out as well, but this comes on the heels, immediately on the heels of the state of New York, the Judge Caro and state of New York dismissing first-degree murder charges in furtherance of an act of terrorism. As soon as Judge Caro removed the first-degree murder in furtherance of an act of terrorism, immediately Karen was ready with this giant motion the next day and says, by the way, Now that the state government has removed this, how about you get on the same page and do the right thing here? That's her appeal. Now that the state has done the right thing, it's your turn, federal government, to do the right thing. Now, again, before we get started, I want to make sure that you don't think that I'm just supporting a murderer and that Luigi Mangione is a piece of shit who killed an innocent man in the streets of Manhattan and I'm trying to defend him because I'm also a piece of shit. These are constitutional issues, and it also addresses the big elephant in the room, the healthcare system in America. If you don't like those arguments about constitutional issues and defending those, even if you've got a bad guy, and I'm not saying Luigi Mangione is a bad guy, so stop that shit right now. I'm not saying he's a bad guy. But if he was a bad guy, we still believe in a rule of law in this country, or we should, unless you're the federal government, and then you do overcharging and shit, which Karen's going to spell out in detail, and I'm going to shout it out through the universal translator, her anger translator. All right. Motion to dismiss the indictment and notice of intention. Luigi Mangione, through his counsel, moves to dismiss the indictment filed against him and, in the alternative, to strike the notice of intention to seek the death penalty. Now, by the way, that sentence is super important. She's actually saying, toss out the entire federal government indictment, everything. And if you're not going to do that, at least remove the death penalty. That's huge. She's actually asking for, and a judge is going to have to rule on it. And I don't suspect a judge is ever in their right mind going to say, you're right. Although, wouldn't that be amazing? Judge Caro, by the way, surprised me already with some of the stuff that he ruled on. I didn't think he was going to rule that way. And so judges, there are still good judges in this country. And hopefully this is another one of those good judges. But anyways, she's asking Karen for the pie in the sky dream. Remove the entire indictment. If not, at least remove the death penalty. And I think she makes more than a compelling argument. And I'm going to make sure it's spelled out just like, well, she makes sure it's spelled out to the judge and then says, by the way, in case you missed it, let me spell it out in detail. And I'm going to do the same. Procedural and factual summary. Brief background of Luigi Mangione. Now, this is important because what Karen's going to point out is in a death penalty case, you have to be able to show mitigating factors, which means when you're going to execute someone, the jury needs to have a full understanding of that person's life. What kind of person are they? Are they a person of good character or bad character? Have they always been a bad seed, or they're an upstanding citizen? That goes into mitigating factors when the jury is deciding whether or not that the only answer to this person is to put them to death because they're a piece of shit who does not deserve to walk this planet. In order to do that, you need to provide mitigating factors. Well, let's consider, has he ever been a piece of shit before? Has he lived an exemplary life? Has he done good things? Those things are called mitigating factors in part, and other things as well. So what Karen's going to start out with right here is, by the way, Luigi Mangione is a really good guy, aside from the one thing that you're accusing him of doing, which is killing Brian Thompson. And you never let us be able to tell you that he's a really good guy. So let me explain to you why. One, it's against the law for you not to be able to have us be able to tell you why he's a really good guy in some regards. And secondly, you're violating the law by not allowing us to even have this discussion, and so on and so on. Now, let's get into it. Luigi Mangione is a 27-year-old Italian-American dual citizen. By the way, there was a lot of talk in the very beginning, and yes, I'm going to side tangent about a lot of stuff. There was a lot of talk in the very beginning about whether Luigi Mangione was a dual citizen, whether he actually had citizenships in Italy. And if he did, there were people who were asking for Luigi Mangione's parent company, Italy, to basically ask for Luigi to be sent to Italy and get him out of the U.S. court system. And that wasn't going to happen. It wasn't an option, but there was a lot of question about whether he was a dual citizen. Right here, she's admitting he's a dual citizen, in case you had that question still on your mind. So Luigi Mangione, an Italian-American dual citizen whose beautiful, promising life has been derailed. Born in Maryland into a large, close, loving family, he is now fighting for his life against a government that seeks to execute him. From an early age, Mangione's intellect and character have stood out. These are part of those mitigating factors that the government wanted no part of hearing. They want to hear no part about Luigi Mangione being a good guy, and they want America to not hear any fucking thing. I'll try to limit the F-bombs. I'm not doing well. I'm 10 minutes in and I've dropped three. Anyways, from early age, Mangione's intellect and character stood out. He excelled in Catholic elementary school, where one teacher wrote that she could still see his sweet face from her classroom years ago. When he needed a greater academic challenge, he earned admission into the rigorous Gilman School in Baltimore, very prestigious school and high paying. He has been described by family, friends, and school staff and his peers as kind, intelligent, a leader, and someone who thinks of others before himself. He was athletic, excelling in several sports, including soccer, track, and wrestling. He taught himself to code, built a gaming app adopted by a company, founded the Gilman's robotic program, and competed against other schools' robotics programs, advancing to the national semifinals. This kind of stuff is the stuff that the government wanted no part of. Is Luigi Mangione a horrible monster, or did he have a up and promising life? Was he a good person aside from this act? They didn't want to hear anything about this, so Karen's going to spell it out to start, and she's going to circle back to why you should have heard this in the first freaking place. Teachers and friends describe him as a bright, humble, curious, funny, and authentically himself. His advisors called him intellectually curious and a hard worker. Mangione was genuinely surprised when he was told that he was Gilman's valedictorian because achievement for him was a byproduct of curiosity rather than a goal. This is important because people are saying that Luigi Mangione is a narcissist who wants all this attention and has got this big, like, I'm the only one who could do this kind of thing. In contrast, Karen Agnifilo is trying to point out to you he's a very humble individual who was surprised when he was voted to be valedictorian because he's not looking for achievements. He's not looking for recognition. So she's basically already trying to basically tell you he's not the guy some people think he is, which is a guy who's seeking a bunch of recognition. That's not the way he's been in the past, maybe not the way he is now. In his valedictory speech to his classmates and his school, he praised others and spoke of their accomplishments and never once talked about himself. I.e., he's not a narcissistic kid looking for, look at what I've done, look at what I've done. He praised other people and their accomplishments in his valedictorian speech. He attended the University of Pennsylvania, completing in 4 years a bachelor's and a master's degree in computer science. That should normally take about 6 years. Luigi Mangione did it in 4 years. So she's building a track record. This guy's a good guy, a hardworking student, and thinks of others first. Throughout his schooling, he often sought roles where he could help or teach others, such as a camp counselor or teaching assistant. He likes to help other people. In summary, Mr. Mangione is a smart, kind, and well-rounded young man. And F you very much. You never gave us a chance to tell you that because you had decided he is the worst criminal on the face of the planet and seeking to execute him and told everybody everything horrible about the man without allowing anybody to say anything good about the man. So let us take a moment to say something good about the man. Now let's go on. Now, brief case background. Now, this gets huge. This is going to get documented and take us a long time. It's the case background. And yeah, I'm going to rant on some places in here, I think. The New York City mayor, NYPD, and the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, staged an internationally televised perp walk where a phalanx, I love her wording, a phalanx of heavily armored agents with long guns slow walked a heavily shackled Mangione to this very courthouse for his initial appearance on a complaint charging a death-eligible offense. I love Karen Agnifilo. She knows how to paint a picture. You slow walked my perp, shackled by a phalanx of officers. I love her writing. Anyways, between February and April of 2025, the United States, and by the way, that wasn't, before I get back to that sentence, that wasn't an overstatement. That perp walk was unprecedented. That perp walk was something straight out of a Marvel movie, and which she'll mention as well in here. It was all those things she said. She is not over exaggerating. Everyone in America, I think, saw it. Everybody in the world saw it. It was the most ridiculous perp walk I've ever seen. Between February and April 2025, the United States Attorney General rolled out the new administration's death penalty agenda by making Mangione's case the first in which her Justice Department would seek the death penalty. As a result, when Mangione's counsel asked the prosecutors for an opportunity to present mitigating factors like, hey, by the way, he's a good guy, this is not the person you think he is, that request was denied. The death penalty decision had already been made because it was being sought based on politics and not merit. This is huge. Pam Bondi made it clear, hey, Trump's back in office. He's directed me to execute bad boys, and he's the worst of bad boys. We will execute him as the poster child of how we do things differently in this country from this point on. It was all about politics. It was all about making Mangione a figure from day one, and Karen's calling her out on it. It's a political decision, not on the merits, because they wouldn't even listen to mitigating factors like they have to, and she's going to point that out. Now, as part of the orchestrated effort to secure a death-eligible indictment against Mangione and to achieve maximum publicity in the process, the Attorney General and other law enforcement officials have intentionally and serially violated his constitutional rights, including the constitutional violations listed in Section 3 below. I'm just getting started, is what she's saying. The federal government has overcharged him with the death penalty offense. That is something that I've had long-term criminal defense attorney Ali Benevento on my show multiple times. They overcharged that man. Way back in the day when you heard me go on with Cynthia Thornton, one of the first things she said, another attorney from New York and Texas, said they've overcharged that man. Attorneys who are in criminal defense are like, man, you're overcharging this guy. They know that. The New York County's district attorney also overcharged him with murder charges related to terrorism. And here's the kicker. On September 16th, this is written days after that. On September 16th, the New York Supreme Court dismissed the terrorism-related charges as being unsupported by the evidence. Mr. Mangione relies on this court, as he did in the New York court, to correct the errors made by the government and prevent this case from proceeding as a death penalty prosecution. That is what Karen did. She waited until the judge in the state ruled terrorism is not what this guy is. Let's take that off the table. And now said, hey, bitches, it's your turn to do the right thing. The state now have realized we overcharged them. Now you, federal government, do the freaking right thing and realize you're overcharging them. And let's have a civil trial. So this now is where I highlighted in purple because she says 6 ways Mangione's constitutional rights have been violated. I can name 8 ways that Luigi Mangione's civil rights have been violated, 2 of which Karen Agnifilo has stated you violated his rights, but she doesn't bring them up in this one. So she should have said, in my opinion, she should have said 6 of the 8 ways that you violated, because there's more. There's more. And oh my God, if you're going to be a nation of laws and you're going to execute somebody using law, how about you follow the law? You've already violated his constitutional rights. Here, she's going to lay out 6 ways. There's actually, I think, 8 ways and maybe more, because I can think of 2 other ways I don't think she addressed here. I'll correct myself if I get in there and go, oh, she did address it there, but I think there's a couple of extras. The actions of the United States Attorney General, federal and state law enforcement, the New York City mayor, and others have violated Mr. Mangione's constitutional and statutory rights and have fatally prejudiced this death penalty case in the following 6 ways. First, the Attorney General's extrajudicial statements in her April 1st, 2025 press release, her follow-up Instagram post, and her televised appearance on Fox News Sunday on April 6th concerning the Southern District of New York's grand jury investigation violate the secrecy mandated by Federal Rule of Criminal Procedure 6E, are presumed prejudicial under Rule 23.1, and in the context of unconstitutional staged perp walk, violated Mangione's 5th and 8th Amendment rights. Yeah, that is 100% accurate. That is the first of the violations of Luigi Mangione's. I'll try to see if I can get those other 2 in there for you at the end if she doesn't hit it. Second, by indicating this case, yeah, she's going to break down that more. I was going to go back and break it down for you so you can understand what the constitutional violation was, but she's going to break it down for you. So break it down. We'll break it down also. Second, by indicating this case, by indicting. Second, by indicting this case while a motion regarding grand jury prejudice was pending and where the defense explicitly requested that the government screen the grand jurors for exposure to the Attorney General's illegal and prejudicial statements, the government allowed the grand jury to be prejudiced such that this indictment should be dismissed. What is that saying? The Attorney General in the United States came on public TV and said this man is a murderer before the grand jury was actually making their decision. The fact that that happened means everyone on the grand jury who's deciding whether Luigi Mangione is a murderer has just been told by the highest authority in the country he is a murderer. So before they even go in there, they've been told he's a murderer, and that's what they came back with the conclusion. What a surprise. That was a violation both ways. A violation for her to have said it, and then a violation when the defense said, hey, motherfuckers, that's 4. Hey, you can't prejudice the jury. You need to screen the jurors to see if they've heard what Pam Bondi just said. Nope, we're not going to do that. Second violation of Luigi Mangione's constitutional rights. Third, by refusing counsel's request to present mitigating information prior to the decision on whether to authorize a capital prosecution and by explicitly basing a death penalty decision on political agenda, this decision to pursue the death penalty was arbitrary and capricious and in violation of the 5th and 8th Amendments. So The defense, on top of those 2 violations, has asked, at least let us provide you the mitigating factors before you go to a grand jury and say that he needs to be put to death on why maybe you're overcharging in the death thing. The federal government's response was, nope, not interested in hearing mitigating factors, a violation of his constitutional rights. It's been established that they need to listen to mitigating factors. They did not care to listen to we are going forward with convening a grand jury and having them say that Luigi needs to be put to death, and we don't care to hear about your mitigating factors. That's the 3rd violation of his constitutional rights, according to the 5th and the 8th Amendments, due process, and such like that. So, 4th, returning a death eligible indictment through unconstitutional and prejudicial conduct violates Mangione's due process rights by forcing him to be tried before a death qualified jury. This is a nuanced thing. It's going to come up heavy in the argument, and maybe comes up in this document, I think, before we get to the argument, that basically says a death qualified jury is different. To cut ahead a little bit, normally when you're not facing the death penalty, a jury is a jury of your peers, and it's a representative sample of everyone. But a death qualified jury is a jury that specifically is said, I'm willing to execute somebody if need be. That tends to be white conservative individuals and males. We know that statistically, and we have been fighting in our court systems the whole constitutionality of death qualified juries in the first place, because once you put death on the line, the jury makeup is much different and much more likely to convict, and therefore a violation of a fair process, because you're stacking the jury against the person. If that gets confusing, hopefully we'll break it down more later. And then 5th and 6th. 5th, the death penalty is arbitrarily imposed in violation of the 5th and the 8th Amendments. It's kind of a tack on to the 4. It's again, it's talking about death qualified juries and how it's not representative of the public, because again, you tend to get white conservative males on there, and it's not fair to the defendant. And 6, the Federal Death Penalty Act lacks constitutional procedures approved by Congress, and the executive's efforts to gap fill through procedures not authorized by Congress failed to satisfy the Constitution. And that's a hard one to explain, but basically she's saying Congress hasn't fully made rulings on how to apply the Federal Death Penalty Act, so it's not fully basically established, and using it is a violation of his constitutional rights. It's a little harder argument. Now, let me give the 2 extra ones that she didn't mention that in here that Karen Agnifilo has mentioned other places. The arrest and seizure of Luigi Mangione, the arrest, detainment, and the seizure of his items in Pennsylvania was a violation of his constitutional rights. It was an unconstitutional arrest. They never read his Miranda rights for 17 minutes. They didn't tell him he was under investigation. They arrested him for things that were said when he wasn't told that he was under investigation, or that he had the right to remain silent. That was all illegal. They searched his bag illegally before they placed him under arrest or told him he was under investigation, found items, repacked his bag, and then told him he's under arrest or he's under investigation. That was all one of a ginormous set of violating his constitutional rights that she didn't even mention here. On top of that, there was another one. Oh yeah. How about the government listening in and eavesdropping on Luigi Mangione's attorney-client privileged phone calls in violation of his constitutional rights, eavesdropping on them and then sharing it with the state. And so the state and the federal government both shared the information from the listened to phone calls by attorney-client privilege, a violation of his constitutional rights. And that's 2 of them Karen didn't even get into this document. Holy shit, the paragraph should have started, the whole thing should have started with 6 of the 8 constitutional violations you've already made against my client. Number 4, are we on page 20? We might be almost done with this. Yeah, United Healthcare. That's an interesting one to start with. To understand why this case has garnered the attention of the public, law enforcement, and politicians at the highest levels, it is necessary to understand the role of United Healthcare Group. Now, again, I've stated from the beginning, and I've stated with some opposition to the attorneys that I talked to on here, that it appears to me that Karen Agnifilo is attempting or is prepared at least, to put United Healthcare and our health insurance industry on trial. To which lawyers said, and I 100% agree with them, that's a real hard uphill battle. Why? Let me restate it the same way I've said it in many, many videos, because some of you are brand new to this. As soon as Luigi's attorneys start to talk about United Healthcare and what they were doing, the prosecution is going to say, objection, Your Honor, the healthcare system is not on trial here. Luigi Mangione is on trial for killing Brian Thompson, end of story, and therefore it's irrelevant. And the judge is going to sustain that. Sustain. The healthcare system's not on trial. And so I said from the very beginning, I think that Karen is posturing to put the healthcare system on trial. One of the first things she said to Pam Bondi, when Pam Bondi said that the federal government is directed to execute Luigi Mangione, is, you are calling my guy a murderer, despite the fact that you're defending a murderous healthcare system. And when I heard her say a murderous healthcare system, I'm like, oh shit, she's going to try to put the healthcare system on trial. And, again, I got some pushback from my attorney friends, and I love my attorney friends. Ali Benevento and I are going to talk about this document in particular coming up very soon, I think on Wednesday of next week. So I'm going to have her thoughts and opinions on this as well. So there's no love loss. There's no anger towards her. It's not like it's a fight between us. It's just that she couches it a little bit like, man, that's a hard sell. And I 100% agree with her. It's a hard sell. And yet Karen Agnifilo is lining that up in both the state case and the federal case, in my opinion. So going back to the United Healthcare Group. United Health Group is the nation's largest insurer and world's largest healthcare conglomerate. And you're thinking, what is that relevant to anything? Over the last 2 decades, United Health has transformed from a large insurer into a vertically integrated enterprise. The company has acquired physician practices, clinics, pharmacy benefit managers, creating an internal supply chain that enables United Healthcare to pay itself to deliver care to people enrolled in its health plans. I'm going to explain that in a minute. United Health earned more than $400 billion in revenue last year as the third largest company on the Fortune 500. United Healthcare was under investigation by the Department of Justice for antitrust and monopoly, basically, charges. What they were trying to do is they were trying to form a monopoly, and they were buying up all the little companies below in the healthcare system, all the way from the doctor. They're trying to buy the doctors who make recommendations about what you should get cared for. They're buying the doctors. They're buying the hospitals. They're buying the pharmaceutical companies in between. They're buying even the company that works between you, the customer, and health insurance industries to make sure that you're not getting overcharged. They bought that company so that every part of the step of the process, from the doctor all the way through to the insurance company, is all owned by the same company so that they can make more profits. It should be illegal. And that's what the Department of Justice was saying, in my opinion. That shit is illegal. You're creating a completely unfair system. And what a lot of people in America want to do is, I don't want to hear about it. Brian Thompson was just doing his job, making his shareholders money. How dare somebody be shot for doing their job? He made people a lot of money. Fuck yeah, he made a lot of money. That's 6 or something. But yeah, he made a lot of money, and that's at root of this problem. And again, the government doesn't want you to even mention it. It's immaterial what Brian Thompson did. We're going to mention that he's the CEO of the healthcare, but we're not going to let Luigi Mangione talk about why that might have been a reason for anybody to do this. And it doesn't mean Luigi Mangione did it. So let's keep that in mind. We don't know that the defense is going to say Luigi Mangione didn't do it. We don't know exactly what their defense is. In October of 2024, a United States Senate, in October 2024, a United States Senate committee released a report stating that United Healthcare Group and other Medicare Advantage insurers used algorithms to increase the rate of claim denials so as to maintain specific profit targets regardless of patient medical needs. The Senate had already done an investigation into United Healthcare specifically, saying that they are using algorithms, AI, to reject people's medically necessary treatments to make more money. That was already being investigated by the United States Senate, and it launched a Department of Justice investigation. But they want you to all forget about that shit because Luigi Mangione is a piece of shit murderer. So we'll get back to that. The shooting of Brian Thompson at about 6:44 a.m. on the morning of December 4th, 2024, Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare, was shot and killed while he was walking on a nearly deserted street 20 minutes before sunrise in Midtown Manhattan. The shooting, which was captured on video, immediately created. By the way, captured on video was not Luigi Mangione. Captured on video was a man in a mask who the prosecution says is Luigi Mangione. Let's not get that twisted. Many people tell me all the time who are for the prosecution say, "Oh my God, how could you defend that piece of shit? He literally is caught on camera shooting Brian Thompson." F you, he was not caught on camera shooting somebody. A masked man was caught on camera shooting somebody. That's what you saw. Now, if you want to make the argument that masked man is Luigi Mangione, that is for the court of law to decide, or the court of justice to decide, and the law enforcement. But that case has not been made in a court of law. So no, you did not see Luigi Mangione shoot Brian Thompson. You saw someone in a mask shoot Brian Thompson. We do not know. And that's something that is going missed by so many people. And Karen Agnifilo points it out. Nowhere is anybody talking about his presumption of innocence. You just categorically say, we know he killed him because we saw him do it. No, you did not. You saw somebody in a mask do it. And maybe it was Luigi Mangione. And once that is proven in a court of law, then yes, you can say we saw Luigi Mangione do it because it was proven in a court of law. The man behind the mask was Luigi Mangione. But you are getting ahead of yourself when you tell everyone in America, we saw Luigi shoot him. No, you did not. All right. The shooting, which was captured on video, immediately created widespread speculation that Thompson was killed due to the United Healthcare's public and controversial policies of placing profit over patient care. So right off the bat, the narrative on TV and everywhere was that man was probably shot because of what United Healthcare has been doing lately and the investigations they're under, and so on and so on. Public reaction was immediate and intense. As relevant to this motion, this shooting generated nearly unprecedented public interest and social comment. This is all leading to, how is Luigi Mangione going to get a fair trial? Everyone in America, everyone in the entire world, to some extent, knows about this case. Now, I say that with a grain of salt, because I have heard people tell me, I don't know who Luigi Mangione is. So it's an overstatement to say everyone in the world. What I'm saying is it feels like someone in every country on this planet has heard about this case. It is an international case. Number 6, the NYPD press leaks and the arrest of Luigi Mangione. In the days following Thompson's death, the New York City Police Department, NYPD, fanned the flames of public discourse about the shooter's motives, as well as public comment about United Healthcare's practices, by leaking information that the bullets and shell casings bore the words delay, deny, and depose. A nationwide manhunt ensued, with the public following every twist and turn and speculating on social media about the identity of the shooter. Now, what she's stating there is, right off the bat, the media itself and law enforcement itself made America aware that this was about United Healthcare when they pointed out that the bullet casing said delay, deny, depose. In a lot of cases, and a lot of murder cases, the details like that would be left out. Why would it be left out? Because when you go for somebody to incriminate for the murder, you want to make sure that only the killer knows certain details. They don't have to tell the public that the shell casings said those words. They did that because they wanted America to focus on, this guy was killed because he was the CEO of United Healthcare. And to further it, the words on the bullet casings prove why he did it. They were setting up the narrative about why he did it when they didn't need to, right from the very beginning. Luigi Mangione was arrested by Altoona Police Department on Monday, December 9th, that's 5 days later, at 9:30 in the morning, and held in jail in Pennsylvania. Members of the New York County District Attorney's Office, DANY, staff, and the NYPD traveled from New York to Altoona, Pennsylvania. I'm adding some extra words for clarity, to collect evidence and try and interview him. Now, I want to point out, just as a caveat, if you haven't seen my long video, when Luigi Mangione was detained at the McDonald's by Altoona Police Department, a list of items that were in his possession was made on scene by the arresting officers. Then he was transported to the prison at Altoona, Pennsylvania, at which point an officer from New York Police Department showed up, and a new list was generated of what was in Luigi Mangione's possessions and signed by the two arresting officers in Altoona, as well as the NYPD officer. And I asked then, and I ask now, why the fuck? That's 7. Why is an NYPD officer coming all the way to Altoona, Pennsylvania to be part of listing what's in his possession and signing off on it? That looks sketchy as hell to me. Now, maybe that makes perfect good sense, and maybe that's been done a million times, and maybe I'm just missing something, but it looks sketchy as hell to me. And I'm not saying that evidence was planted, but I'm saying it looks sketchy as hell to me. And that, if I were an attorney, I'd want to explain, why did Officer Diaz go down there from NYPD and sign that arrest warrant with new items listed in the list of inventory Detroit items. And I know some of you out there, oh, you have to understand devil's advocates. The preliminary search just left some stuff out, but it wasn't like new items appeared. It was already there. They just listed it further in detail. The police say, whatever, you justify it any way you want to. The reality is the initial intake didn't list certain items. When they got with the NYPD, new items appeared on the list. You can justify it any way you want. It looks sketchy as I didn't finish that sentence, by the way. I didn't do the hard K at the end, so I don't want to count that as one of my bad ones. All right. Mangione agrees to waive extradition to New York. On Monday, December 16th, by the way, represented by the attorney Thomas Dickey in Pennsylvania, on Monday, November 16th, Mangione's counsel, that was Thomas Dickey, informed DANY that he intended to waive extradition, which means he's not going to fight going to New York State, to appear in the Supreme Court of New York County. As of the date of extradition, there was no indication that the United States Attorney General was investigating or had any intention of prosecuting the case. What does that mean? Understand. In Altoona, Pennsylvania, when he was arrested, the state of New York wanted him for murder charges in New York. And so Luigi Mangione was being extradited to New York to face charges in the state of New York. At no point did the federal government, who also has a district inside New York called the Southern District of New York, the United States government, Southern District of New York, that entity wasn't talking about prosecuting Luigi Mangione, had nothing on the radar. And so Luigi agreed to come to New York without knowing that the federal government was planning to prosecute him as well. That's what the argument is here. Mangione's counsel made arrangements with DANY as well as the chambers of New York Supreme Court Justice Gregory Caro, that's all in the state, for Mangione to appear before Justice Caro on Thursday for arraignment on New York State charges. And again, if you don't know the story, he was hoodwinked, he was side-blinded, whatever you want to say. He was bent over and given it without Vaseline. Sorry to be brutal. He was screwed. There's no way I can get around not making that vulgar. He was ramrodded. I'm not done. I am done. Okay. He was worked over by the federal government, who came in literally in the middle of his state thing and said, by the way, surprise, we're also charging him and we're going to put him to death, is essentially what they did. District Attorney and Police Commissioner's press conference. On Tuesday, December 17th, 2024, the District Attorney and New York City Police Commissioner held, so that part's all done, right? So Luigi Mangione came back to New York to face state charges and then was surprised with federal charges when he got there. On Tuesday, December 17th, 2024, the District Attorney and New York City Police Commissioner held a press conference during which the District Attorney announced that Mangione had been charged with 1 count of murder in the first degree and 2 counts of murder in the second degree, in addition to other offenses. The District Attorney, who did not mention anything about a potential federal case, still at this point, much less a potential death penalty case, not mentioning it yet, specified that 2 of the state murder counts were predicated on allegations that Mangione engaged in acts of terrorism. We now know the Judge Caro has struck down terrorism. You did not, the state of New York charged Luigi Mangione with terrorism, and it was wrong for you to do so. That was the ruling that just came down. And again, kudos to that judge for having the cojones, as my friend Ali Benevento would say, the cojones, to the nuts, the huevos, the balls, to actually say the right thing and do it in great language. The district attorney stated that this was frightening, a well-planned, targeted murder that was intended to cause shock and attention and intimidation. He continued, it occurred in one of the most bustling parts of our city, threatening the safety of local residents and tourists alike, commuters and business people just starting out on their business day. So he's making it sound like Luigi Mangione put a whole bunch of lives in danger and he's a terrorist, and this is why we're going to execute him that way. It's funny, I noticed down below, I knew that we were going to stop at page 22, and we're at 22 on the sideline over here where I got my mouse moving, but it's actually page number 6, because a lot of the stuff was the fluff, and we're only on page 6. So yeah, I'm way taking longer than I thought I was going to do. Anyways, side tangent. All right. So let me do this quote. The New York City Police Commissioner then addressed the press and public by stating the following. And the fact that Karen Agnifilo is highlighting this is to get the point across to the judge, how prejudicial this whole entire thing has been to Luigi Mangione. Here's the quote from the New York City Police Commissioner. Is that Tish, right? Jessica Tish? Is that right? Yeah. In the nearly 2 weeks since Mr. Mangione's killing, we have seen a shocking and appalling celebration of cold-blooded murder. Social media has erupted with praise for this cowardly act. People ghoulishly plastered posters threatening other CEOs with an X over them, or over Mr. Thompson's picture, as though he was some sort of sick trophy. And yesterday, the New York Post reported that some extreme activists were circulating a deck of cards with other most wanted CEOs to be targeted for assassination. These are the threats of a lawless, violent mob who would trade in their own vigilantism for the rule of law that protects us all. She's calling everyone in New York that's doing these things a violent mob. The playing card, by the way, that playing card guy, by the way, faced major consequences. He did not call for anybody's death. He thought it was going to be a funny meme to play on a huge public thing, and he's going to make a few bucks off of having a deck of cards with CEOs pictures on the playing cards and some deeds of things that they'd done that were unsavory. And he ended up getting in major trouble and lost his entire company and a whole bunch of shit because they went after him with both barrels. That's a side tangent. But anyways, let me say this plainly. This is continuing on with the police commissioner's statement. There is no heroism in what Mangione did. This was a senseless act of violence. It was cold, calculated crime that stole a life and put New Yorkers at risk. We don't celebrate murderers, and we don't lionize the killing of anyone. And any attempt to rationalize this is vile, reckless, and offensive to our principles of justice. Now, I want to say one thing to Jessica Tisch. Telling somebody that they believe in the presumption of innocence until proven guilty and calling that person vile, you can go take a very long walk off a short pier, and I'm holding back. I'm doing good. I have gone like 20 minutes without dropping an F-bomb, I think. Anyways, telling people that believing in the presumption of innocence, it makes you a vile person is in itself disgusting and pisses me the hell off. We should presume Luigi Mangione's innocence until proven guilty in a court of law. If he's guilty, then you can say some of these things about him. But he hasn't even stepped into the courtroom for his trial. Yes, he stepped into the courtroom for hearings, but not for his trial. Now, neither the district attorney nor the police commissioner told the public that Mangione was presumed innocent. What did I just say? He should have the presumption of innocence, but nowhere in that statement was a presumption. He is a cold-blooded murderer, and anyone who sympathizes with him is a vile piece of shit, is essentially the message that she wanted to get out. No presumption of innocence, and shaming anyone in America who believes in the presumption of innocence. How the frick are you an American if you don't believe in the presumption of innocence? How dare you shame America for having any kind of attitude that we should presume a person innocent and calling them shameful and sick and twisted for presuming a person innocent? That is a bedrock of our country. Shame on you. Yeah, I'm mad. Rather, they each communicated that Mangione was already guilty of a well-planned, targeted murder and was a terrorist who threatened the safety of our city. Perfectly okay for them to completely stomp all over the bedrock of our society and say the guy's guilty before he's ever stepped into a court, not giving him the presumption of innocence. Bad boys. You know, all arrested people, you know, they're all considered innocent until proven guilty. Well, not on this fucking channel. Not on this. Okay, that's 8. Anyways, not on this one. So anyways, on the morning of Thursday, December 19th, 2024, Mangione appeared in court. So on the morning of December 19th, Mangione appeared in court in Pennsylvania and formally waived extradition to New York. He was then flown from Pennsylvania to Long Island and then put on a helicopter that landed at Manhattan's Wall Street heliport. The mayor, scores of law enforcement, and hundreds of reporters and photographers were waiting for him. The perp walk. OMFG. Go get him, Karen. I love Karen. Well, she's going to slap him like a redheaded stepchild. Freaking, yeah. Anyways, Mangione is perp walked in shackles, surrounded by scores of law enforcement officials, including New York mayor, before hundreds of reporters and TV cameras, in a show of force befitting a captured cartel chief or a comic book villain. Mr. Mangione, at the time, a 26-year-old who had never been in trouble with the law, was perp walked before scores of television cameras and press reporters, surrounded by armed law enforcement officials in tactical SWAT gear and raid jackets. The perp walk appears to have been arranged by the FBI NYPD Joint Task Force, who, along with the city's highest elected official and upwards of 50 armed agents in sunglasses, black jackets, and semi automatic rifles, waited for the helicopter to arrive before positioning themselves around Mangione and slowly marching their orange clad, shackled trophy the full length of the pier so that press, which the agents summoned to be assembled, could depict him forever as what our elected representatives and law enforcement officials wanted him to be, a guilty terrorist deserving of execution. I love how Karen Agnifilo spells that out. You literally flew him to the end of a long pier that I want her to walk off of a long way on a short pier. Put him at the end of a long pier, surrounded him by a wall of officers, including the mayor, and then slow walked his shackled ass surrounded by armed guys with sunglasses and assault rifles, and slow walked him past the press that you assembled to watch the whole perp walk. That was a staged, choreographed piece of horseshit, illegal constitutional violation. Motherfucker, you can't do that, says Karen Agnifilo in better words. All right. By the way, the mayor, look at this footnote. The mayor, being under indictment and legally prohibited from possessing a firearm by the terms of his pretrial release conditions, was in charcoal overcoat and light gray scarf. He plainly had no role in the charade of law enforcement procedure. The mayor himself was under indictment, facing charges and not allowed to have a firearm, and he's surrounded by all these cops with firearms, and he can be near them, but it's just bad optics. It's just bad optics. All right. This perp walk was done purely to dehumanize Mangione and had no legitimate law enforcement purpose. It goes without saying that federal agents transport presumed innocent defendants to the Southern District of New York courthouse every day without humiliating them through a staged perp walk, which was ruled to be unconstitutional 25 years ago in Laurel versus Charles. Let me repeat that statement. People get brought to the courthouse at the Southern District Courthouse every day without being perp walked by flown to the end of a pier and then perp walked, slow walked in shackles with the press all surrounding them and the mayor walking, bragging about their trophy. No other criminal gets that. Why, Luigi Mangione? You violated his constitutional rights. That is illegal and it's been unconstitutional for 25 years. The mayor and police commissioner's press conference after the perp walk. A few minutes after Mangione was placed into a van following the illegal perp walk to be transported to federal court, the New York City mayor held a press conference at the heliport alongside the police commissioner saying, quote, "Police Commissioner Tisch and I want to send a clear and loud message that this act of terrorism and the violence that stems from it are something that we will not tolerate in this city. We wanted personally to be here to show this symbolism of leading from the front," unquote. Karen goes on, in the mayor's words, his presence at the perp walk was symbolic. MFR just said it. We wanted to make a symbolic gesture. This was a show. That is the mayor's own words. This was a show, a symbolism to America. This is a piece of shit that we will not tolerate. It was symbolism. In the mayor's words, his presence at the perp walk was symbolic, further showing that this was not legitimate law enforcement measure. As with every press conference concerning Mangione, there is no mention of his presumption of innocence or his right to due process, because none of these MFers believe in the freaking law or the foundation of this country, which is presumption of innocence until proven guilty in the court of law. Following the unconstitutional staged perp walk and the mayor's public remarks about sending a message and symbolism, Mr. Mangione was brought to federal court for an initial appearance on a complaint charging 4 counts. 1 count, murder through the use of a firearm during the crime of stalking, is punishable by death penalty. Following the initial appearance, Mr. Mangione was detained and held at the Metropolitan Detention Center. On Monday, December 23rd, 2024, Mangione appeared in New York Supreme Court for an arraignment on the New York County indictment charging him with first and second degree murder and other crimes. So both now the federal government and the state are after Luigi Mangione, charging him with a capital offense of that carrying murder. Now, the progress of the federal case after his initial appearances. Counsel for Mr. Mangione, that's Karen Agnifilo and her team, had steady communications with SDNY, Southern District of New York prosecutors, that's the federal government, in late December 2024 and January 2025. On Friday, January 3rd, 2025, counsel consented to a 30-day continuance of the preliminary hearing date of January 18th. On the evening of January 7, 2025, the parties had a phone conference during which the Southern District of New York prosecutors indicated that the capital case committee, so there has to be a committee formed in order to decide whether or not they're going to go after the death penalty. That capital case committee was then the committee that was formed and established under that then President Joe Biden. The problem is that right here in January 7, we're about to transition to a new presidency on January 20th of Donald Trump. That's going to lead to an unprecedented, oops, oh, fuck, we don't give a shit, just proceed. That was 9. All right, we're just going to proceed forward with this anyways, despite the fact that this is unfair to to Luigi Mangione. We don't care. So let's follow what happened. So they indicated that the capital case committee under Joe Biden would be free for a virtual meeting on the 13th. That's before the 20th, when Trump will be sworn into office. The next day, January 8th, 2025, the SDNY prosecutors emailed them that the meeting would be around 11:45 on January 13th, which was the only date available. The prosecutors also stated that you are free to submit something in writing if you like, but it's not required. So they're saying to the defense, if you want to, we're going to go ahead and do this, but if you want to respond, you can, but you don't have to. Counsel understood that with the change in administration less than 2 weeks away, because that's what it was from the 13th when they were going to hear this thing, it was only 2 weeks away from Trump being sworn into office. Actually, it looks like 1 week, 13th to the 20th is, anyways, that's the inauguration. Anyways, I'm getting something mixed up there. Time was of the essence, and the government would not give the defense more than a few days to develop and present an argument against the death penalty. So when they convene the capital case committee, they're supposed to decide whether it really is worthy of going to a death penalty case. There's supposed to be mitigating factors that the defense is allowed to show to say, look, this shouldn't be a capital case at this stage. But the government at no point in time wanted anything to do with hearing the defense. They didn't give a shit. They're required to hear the defense, but they didn't give a shit. They gave them a super short window and then essentially gave them no time anyways. We'll explain that as we go on. And again, it gets more detailed in the argument section, which isn't going to make it into this video. Counsel was also told that due to the time limitations, an in-person meeting was not possible. So they're just going to have to do this in Zoom meeting or whatever. So every step of the way, they're telling counsel, hey, by the way, you only have 1 week and we're not going to do it in person. You're going to have to do it on Zoom. They're dictating every bit of the terms on a super short window that should be extremely longer. Counsel was given 5 days after being on the case for 3 weeks to make a submission to the prior administration, Joe Biden's capital committee. So on Sunday morning of January 12th, at 9:07, counsel, that's Luigi Mangione's counsel, emailed an 11-page single-spaced written submission to Aaron J. Stewart of the capital case section. That's the capital case committee that's basically under Biden, and the 3 Southern District of New York prosecutors detailing why the death penalty was inappropriate. So they did. They were given a super short window to come up with some kind of response, and they said, okay, here it is, 11-page thing. It is not appropriate to proceed with the death penalty in this case. Defense counsel explained that because Mr. Mangione had only been arrested about a month earlier, and because counsel only had 5 days to prepare the letter, there was no opportunity for them to conduct a meaningful mitigation analysis, which typically takes several months and sometimes more than a year. Normally, they're given months, if not a year. The government wanted to give them 1 week at best. And so they're writing in their letter, this is not fair. Normally, we have months, if not a year, to make this response, and you're trying to make us do it in a week. That's not fair. With that explicit limitation, counsel provided 4 reasons why the federal government should not pursue the death penalty. So despite the fact that Karen's saying, look, we should have had months, if not a year, to do this, and you only gave us a week. So we'll just duly noted, you're only giving us a week, you pieces of shit. So duly noted, you only gave us a week. And yet here we are. We're still going to give you 4 reasons why you shouldn't bring this to a capital murder charge. Here's their 4 reasons. First, the submission argued that because DANY's case charging Mr. Mangione with first-degree murder, which carries a punishment of life imprisonment without parole, was already indicted there was a reduced federal interest in pursuing the death penalty. What does that mean? The state of New York had already accused Luigi Mangione of murder in the first degree and furtherance of an act of terrorism. That should have been enough. Does the federal government really need to pipe in? He's already been charged with the highest charge that New York State has to offer him. That should have been enough. We pointed out that the investigation was conducted by DANY and the NYPD and that any involvement by federal agencies was minimal and incidental. We reminded the prosecutors of the DOJ's own justice manual, which provides that prior to charging a capital offense, prosecutors must carefully assess whether an accused is subject to effective prosecution in another jurisdiction. Listen to this. The Department of Justice own manual says that prior to the federal government charging a capital offense, the prosecutors must carefully assess whether the accused is already subject to an effective prosecution in another jurisdiction, i.e. the state. The state already was prosecuting Luigi Mangione and already made charges against him for murder in the first degree with furtherance of act of terrorism. The prosecutors in the federal case should have said, hey, has somebody already sufficiently leveled good claims against him? Yeah, and possibly stepped away. But no, they want to put him to death, plain and simple. And two, thoroughly review the substantial or substantiated federal interest principles outlined in this document and the dual successive prosecution policies outlined in the document. So again, there's rules for what happens when you dually prosecute somebody in two different jurisdictions at the same time. There's rules, and Karen basically is lining up. You are not following your own rules, Department of Justice, in this situation. And yes, it's detailed. And yes, there's a lot to be learned. And yes, I think it's interesting for some people, not all of you. So some of you checked out a long time ago. I hope you're staying with me. And we're going to try to get through this in about an hour and a half, I guess, on my first video. The other bonus rants where we get into the argument and the really, really detailed nuts and bolts of the case, in case you're interested, that'll be bonus rants, I'm pretty sure. The Justice Manual further states that the federal authorities must consider the strength of the other jurisdiction's interest in prosecution. The strength of the federal government must weigh whether or not the state has enough on the guy that they'll do good enough, as well as the probable sentence or other consequences if the person is convicted in the other jurisdiction. What's the most likely outcome if New York State successfully prosecutes Luigi Mangione? Life in prison without the possibility of parole. Should have been enough, is what she's basically saying in the Universal Translator. Based on these considerations in the Justice Manual, we argued that the federal authorities should not seek death. You didn't need to seek death. It was good enough. This guy faces life in prison without the possibility of parole. That's high enough of a standard. You should have let it go. But no, you wanted to make a political statement for Trump. Second, and that's not political on my part. I give it zero shits about Republicans versus Democrats. That's not my game. Whoever's in office and does shit, I'm going to call them out. Second, the submission argued that the aggravating factors do not outweigh the mitigating factors ones, as the Justice Manual requires. Again, when you're reviewing a case for the possibility of putting someone to death, you need to listen to both the aggravating factors and the mitigating factors. What are the mitigating factors? The things that would make you go, maybe this guy isn't a piece of shit. Maybe he's lived an exemplary life. He's never had a criminal record. Maybe he's always been a person that serves other people's needs. Those are mitigating factors that should be considered. They did not consider any of those. They wanted no part of any mitigating factors. They completely bypassed that process, and it's part of the requirement, as Karen Agnifilo will show. Counsel asserted that the only colorable statutory aggravating factor was, quote, substantial planning and premeditation. That's the only thing they really had. It was also argued that statutory aggravating factor of grave risk of death to additional persons should not apply because the shooting was at close range and was allegedly targeted against one person and was committed at a time at 6:45 in the morning when the streets of New York are relatively empty. So the two factors that the government tried to use for the death, putting him to death, was substantial planning and premeditation and grave risk to others. And they're pointing out the grave risk to others is a moot point. It was done at close range, point blank range, on a street at a high early point of the day when hardly anybody was around. And that's no different than 100 other murders in New York that you don't charge with death. Third, the submission argued that since the district attorney is prosecuting the shooting as a first-degree murder case, since the district attorney is prosecuting the shooting as a first-degree murder case, that's the state, carrying a sentence of life without parole, the federal government should not spend millions of dollars in taxpayer resources trying to execute Mangione, especially when the federal interest, the stalking of a single person, is so slight in comparison to the district attorney's terrorism charges. In other words, again, you need to weigh how strong the other case is. The state has already got him on charges of terrorism. That is a way heavier accusation. He's a terrorist than he planned this out for a while. So they already had the stronger case. They already had life in prison without the possibility of parole on the table. There's no reason for you to waste millions of dollars of taxpayers' money for the sole purpose of putting Luigi Mangione to death. That's the only reason you're doing it. You're spending millions of dollars of taxpayer money to try to put Luigi Mangione to death, when life in prison without the possibility of parole would have been good enough. Now, of course, we know now life in prison without the possibility of parole has been drastically reduced because first-degree murder has been taken off the table. But he could still spend 25 years to life for second-degree murder. Anyways, finally, the submission argued that each of the 17 cases over the past 4 decades prior to Mangione's case, where the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York filed notices of intent, was significantly distinct from this one. So this gets a little bit complex. There's a lot going on. They argued in their argument to say, look, you shouldn't seek the death penalty, that each of the 17 cases over the past 4 decades prior to Mangione, where the United States for the Southern District filed notices of intent to execute somebody, those 17 cases where the government decided they were going to execute somebody was significantly distinct from Luigi Mangione's case. For starters, each of the 17 defendants was either a leader or a member of a violent drug distribution enterprise or a terrorist organization such as Al-Qaeda or ISIS at the time of the death-eligible murders. They were all terrorists or drug criminal enterprise leaders, not some guy who shot somebody on the streets of New York. Also, all but 4 of the defendants, all but 4 of them, committed multiple murders. And of the 4 that committed only 1 murder, each was committed as part of a criminal enterprise, which Luigi Mangione is not part of a criminal enterprise, and there's no part of the government's case or the state case that suggests that he's part of a criminal enterprise. Those people who, in the times that we've ever sought the death penalty in the federal government, was criminal enterprise or terrorists. 2 of those involved torture, and 2 of which involved contract killing. In addition, 3 of the murders were of witnesses or informants, which we really, really frown upon in this country. Killing people to silence them in a court case is really, really frowned upon. And 1 killing took place in front of the victim's family. In none of those 17 cases that the government decided to seek the death penalty is it anywhere remotely close to 1 guy shot 1 guy in the street of Manhattan. Not even remotely close. So again, Karen's point is, what the living F are you guys doing? None of the previous times that you've done anything is anything like this. What are you doing? Point 13, the virtual meeting with the Capitol Committee and Southern District of New York prosecutors. On Monday, January 13th, a virtual meeting, because they're doing it over Zoom, whatever, was held between Mangione's counsel, representatives of the Biden administration's Capitol Committee, so that's the death penalty committee that's deciding where they're going to go with that, and the Southern District of New York prosecutors. The presentation reiterated the points made on January 12th, the letter, as to which there were no questions or comments. So they see the defense counsel's objection and they're like, we got no comment, no comment. We're going to ignore everything that Karen Agnifilo just said about why we shouldn't do this. No comment, not going to fucking address it. That's like 10. 1 or more of the government lawyers had questions about Mr. Mangione's mental and physical state over the previous months and years, to which counsel explained that there was insufficient time to locate and assemble the relevant records and consult with potential experts before meeting with the committee. So they want to know about his mental health stuff. They're like, look, we have only had a week to prepare this. The government lawyers indicated that due to the imminent change in administration, because now we know we're changing presidents from Biden to Trump. So the government lawyers indicated that due to the imminent change in the administration, there was not time for Mangione's counsel to present a mitigating package to the Biden administration's Capitol Committee. Holy shit. You are required to allow the defense to provide mitigating circumstances before you even decide to prosecute somebody with the death penalty. And what they say is, hey, man, there's not enough time. So the defense, you do not get to submit a mitigating package. It's just not enough time. We're changing administrations. We don't have time. Don't worry about it. And they said that they would make a decision with the data they had. We'll just go with what we got. Thank you very much. We don't need to hear, we do not hear, we don't have to hear shit from you. We don't have to obey the law. We don't have to do anything that's constitutionally required. We will not hear your mitigating factors. We will just go with what we've got. Thank you very much. And we will ignore the 11-page letter that you complained about things. We will just not comment on that. We're just going to proceed with whatever the fuck we want to do. That's like 11, which did not include any mitigating information. President Trump's orders a change in the death penalty policy. Holy shit. On January 20th, 2025, Donald Trump became the 47th president of the United States. On his very first day in office, 7 days after the virtual meeting with the prior administration's Capitol Committee, the president issued a memorandum order entitled, quote, "Restoring the Death Penalty and Protecting Public Safety," unquote. Broadly, the memorandum order outlined the executive branch's new policy that it would seek the death penalty in a far broader and different manner than did the previous administration. So right off the bat, they stalled the Biden's administration, which wasn't pro-death penalty, and said, listen to this. They know Biden's administration isn't real pro-death penalty and hadn't been. Trump's going to come in and he's going to be like, we're going to be pro-death penalty. So you know what we'll do? We'll just stall and delay the Biden administration's committee, which is pansies and won't execute somebody. And we'll wait until Trump gets in. And now we will give both barrels to Luigi Mangione and we'll put him to death because Trump's hard on crime. That's how this is going. Specifically, the new policy involves seeking the death penalty aggressively for, quote, for all crimes of severity demanding its use, unquote, which they said Luigi Mangione counts as that. And in cases involving a capital crime by an undocumented immigrant or murder of law enforcement officer, that the penalty would be sought without consideration of any other factors, such as the specific facts of each case or the presence of mitigating or aggravating factors. So they're saying if you kill somebody in law enforcement or if you're an illegal immigrant, we won't hear your mitigating factors. Luigi Mangione did not kill a law enforcement officer, did not kill, and is not an illegal immigrant, any of those things. 4 days after the president's order, on January 24th, defense counsel spoke with the line prosecutors who said that there was still no decision, but that one was imminent. What is the line prosecutors? In other words, the Southern District of New York, which is a branch of the federal government, so after President Trump said, I want you to be tough on crime and kill people, Karen Agnifilo's team was talking to the Southern District of New York, who works under the federal government, and say, are you going to execute our guy? Are you going to try? They're like, don't worry about it. There's no decision coming. We haven't decided yet. Karen Agnifilo was playing nice. They were telling her, don't worry. We haven't made any decision to kill Luigi Mangione. And so she was waiting for them to make an answer. And they did that in a horseshit, completely blindsided maneuver. Whoo! All right. The February 4th call. On Tuesday, February 4th, 2025, defense counsel spoke with the Southern District of New York prosecutors who stated in substance that the capital case committee under the Biden administration had not made a decision. The prosecutors further stated, both in this call and other calls, that the current administration, the Trump administration, had not yet established a functioning Capitol Review Committee. So we're in transition now. Hey, look, Biden's administration did not make a decision, so we're still on hold. Let's wait till Trump puts together his capital murder committee, and then we'll proceed as follows. So remember, now before they said, we're going to make a decision. Earlier they had said, we're going to make a decision on the capital murder case without your mitigating factors under the previous administration, under Biden's administration. Now they say, you know what, on second thought, we're not going to rule without your mitigating factors. We're not going to rule anyways under Biden's administration. Let's wait until we put Trump's administration in place, who's heavy on capital punishment, and then we'll review on whether we're going to go after the death penalty. Sons of bitches. If you don't understand the political bullshit that's happening there, then let me know, and I'll try to break it down for you in more simple terms. Indeed, the Senate confirmation vote on President Trump's appointment of Pam Bondi to serve as the Attorney General took place on this date. So Pam Bondi hadn't even been placed in office yet, so they hadn't assembled the Capitol Review Committee under Trump yet. So on this same date, Avi Moskowitz, who's he's the death penalty specialist working for Luigi Mangione on his team. Avi Moskowitz is a special counsel when death is on the line. And so at that date, Avi Moskowitz was appointed to learned counsel because they were anticipating Luigi Mangione was going to be sentenced to death. Again, he hadn't been sentenced yet. Normally, you probably wouldn't put Avi Moskowitz on your team until you've been told he's being put to death, but they went ahead, they got him on that day. Now, Attorney General's February 5th, first day memorandum. Attorney General's February 5th, first day memorandum. And I blew a gasket. And I got suspended from TikTok for mentioning this, because when Pam Bondi said Luigi Mangione is a murderer, cold-blooded murderer without the presumption of innocence, and I mentioned it on TikTok, and Karen Agnifilo's response, where she said, "You're calling my man a murderer in defense of a murderous healthcare system," I immediately got shut off on my live on TikTok, and I was told that I was being suspended for hate speech. Hate speech! I'm quoting the words of Pam Bondi, the Attorney General. If you're going to go after for somebody for hate speech, go after Pam Bondi. Oh, you can't because she's not on TikTok. Well, actually, she probably is on TikTok because she's on Instagram and every other fucking platform. That's like 12. Anyways, point being, she's on every other platform, so why not TikTok? Oh, yeah, I got suspended for talking about the news. Pam Bondi said this guy's a murderer. Karen Agnifilo said, you're calling my guy a murderer and defending the murderous healthcare system. I got hate speech and kicked off of, suspended from TikTok for a while. We are losing freedom of speech in this country. Oh, devil's advocates. Nobody violated your freedom of speech. They just violated your freedom of reach. And there's nothing wrong with that. They don't have to give you reach. So they just stop giving you reach. You can say whatever you want in your closet, but you can't talk on TikTok about it. That's not violations of your freedom of speech. True. Government didn't tell TikTok to suspend me. TikTok suspended me. Great. It's great when your private companies are in bed with the government, because then the private companies can censor you when the government can't. That was a side rant. Sorry. In the memorandum, the Attorney General criticized the prior administration for failing to seek the death penalty as aggressively as she and the president believed was appropriate. So right away, hey, Biden was a pansy. We're going to go after the death penalty. Of this, she wrote, quote, "This shameful era ends today," meaning Biden's shameful era of not going after and killing people. So that shameful era ends today. We will start killing people in America that are worthy of death. Going forward, she says, the Department of Justice will once again act as the law demands, including by seeking death sentences where appropriate and swiftly implementing those sentences in accordance with the law. So she believes she's just doing what the law requires, and Biden was too much of a pansy to follow the law. Every step of the way, these MFers are violating the law, but hey, she's making it sound nice and flowery. And everybody who doesn't pay attention to the law, doesn't educate themselves, thinks that she must know what she's talking about. She's the Attorney General of the United States. Am I going to blow a coronary? Yeah. In February 5th, 2025, in her February 5th, 2025 memorandum, Attorney General Bondi revoked the death penalty protocol used by the Biden administration and reverted to the protocol that was in place in the first Trump administration, i.e., we're going to start killing people again. Those protocols provide in reference the part as follows: 9-10.080, non-expedited decision submissions. In any case in which the United States Attorney or Assistant Attorney General is contemplating requesting authorization to seek the death penalty, or otherwise believes that it would be useful to the decision-making process to receive a submission from defense counsel, the United States Attorney or Assistant Attorney General shall give counsel for the defendant a reasonable opportunity to present information for the consideration of the United States Attorney or Assistant Attorney General, which may bear on the decision whether to seek the death penalty. What the hell did that just say? Universal translator. In any case in which you are going to get up there, Pam Bondi, a U.S. Attorney General, and say the government is going to execute Luigi Mangione, you must give the defense time to argue against why you should do so. And you didn't. You told them to go fuck themselves. That's like 12. All right. The protocol further provides that after the conclusion of a reasonable period of time, the United States Attorney or the Assistant Attorney General shall submit the recommendation through the capital case section whether to seek the death penalty, along with certain enumerated materials, including a death penalty analysis, which is described as following. So when you're going to seek the death penalty, you must allow the defense to argue why you shouldn't, and then you must submit the death penalty analysis, which you all said, F you don't get to do. So let's talk about what they should have done. The analysis must identify the applicable threshold intent factors under 18 USC blah, 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 applicable statutory aggravating factors under 18 blah, 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 and applicable mitigating factors under 18 USC blah blah blah. In addition, the United States Attorney or Assistant Attorney General should include his or her conclusion on whether all the aggravating factors found to exist sufficiently outweigh all the mitigating factors. No, sir, we don't want to hear any mitigating factors. How the fuck 13. How could she determine that the aggravating factors outweighed the mitigating factors when they told the defense, we don't want to hear your mitigating factors. We don't care about your mitigating factors. You will not be allowed to present your mitigating factors. The Attorney General is required to hear the mitigating factors, and she did not. And found to exist to justify a sentence of death. Or in the absence of mitigating factors, whether the aggravating factors alone are sufficient to justify a death sentence. And that's where they're going to say, hey, look, in the absence of mitigating factors, because we wouldn't let you present mitigating factors, is it sufficient enough to go ahead with the death sentence? That's what they're going to rely on. Hey, look, it was sufficient enough to go to the death sentence. We don't need to listen to your mitigating factors. Why even mention that you have to listen to the mitigating factors if you could just say, hey, yeah, it's sufficient. We're going forward without mitigating factors. Finally, the protocol in section 9-10 provides that, quote, in determining whether it is appropriate to seek the death penalty, the United States Attorney or Assistant Attorney General, the Capital Review Committee, the Deputy Attorney General, and the Attorney General will determine whether the applicable statutory aggravating factors and any non-statutory aggravating factors sufficiently outweigh the applicable mitigating factors to justify the sentence of death. If you don't listen to the mitigating factors, you can't possibly determine that the aggravating factors outweigh the mitigating factors. You can't possibly do it. All right. Reviewers are to resolve ambiguity as to the presence or the strength of aggravating or mitigating factors in favor of the defendant. So if you're not sure whether it's good or bad, or you're supposed to weigh in favor of the defendant, you need to have an overwhelming aggravating circumstances that overweigh the mitigating factors, which you didn't listen to. And if there's even a close tie between the two, you weigh in favor of the defendant. But guess what you don't have to do? If you don't even listen to the mitigating factors, you don't have to do any of that. You can just go ahead and execute somebody. The analysis employed in weighing the aggravating and mitigating factors should be qualitative, not quantitative. So it's the quality of the argument, not I'm going to bring 40 million charges against you, so I got a big quantity of shit. It's how good are those arguments. You can stack charges all day long and have it all be weak, and you don't just go, well, I got 100 charges against you. That means you're guilty. No, it's the quality of the charges, not the quantity. A sufficiently strong aggravating factor may outweigh several mitigating factors. So in other words, one really good aggravating factor can outweigh a plethora of negative factors because it's not about the number, it's a matter of the quality. Reviewers may accord a weak aggravating or mitigating factor little or no weight. Finally, there must be substantial admissible and reliable evidence of the aggravating factors. Karen Agnifilo is saying you didn't even allow us to present mitigating factors. How could you possibly have weighed whether or not you had better aggravating factors than our mitigating factors when you won't even listen to our mitigating factors? All right, we're on page 14 to 20. We're going to try and get this done. I'm going to try to speed this through and get it done in an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes. Woo! Sorry about that. All right, February 6th email. On Thursday, February 6th, 2025, the day after the Attorney General's first day memorandum, defense counsel emailed the trial prosecutors, so Luigi Mangione's defense, emailed the trial prosecutors the following. If the capital crimes section, that's that group trying to decide if they should accuse him of death, is unable to make a decision based on our first submission. So again, Karen's team already gave them an 11-page note about why they shouldn't seek the death penalty, to which they didn't want to hear it, and they just kind of ignored it. Now she says, okay, you've convened a new death penalty, you've a new committee, you still have our 11-page letter. So if they decide not to rule on our 11-page letter, then, and then we'll read what she says. So, if the capital crime section is unable to make a decision based on our first submission, we respectfully request 3 months in order to give time to conduct a thorough mitigation investigation in order to submit additional information. So what she's saying is, and oh my God, do I have to break this? I do want to. I don't know if I have to. You guys are smart, but I think it's fun to listen to me say it in simple terms. You told me before that I only had a week to present what should have been months or a year for me to prepare. You said I only had a week because the outgoing administration was coming in and we just didn't have time. Then you went ahead and said, we're going to ignore everything you said and we're going to wait for the new convening of a new committee. And now I'm saying, if you're going to ignore the 11 pages I did, give me time, or if you're going to say no to the 11 pages I did, give me time for the full 3 months I should have had when you told me we don't have time because the administration's changing. Give me the full 3 months I should have had now that you have a new committee in place. They basically tell her, go screw yourself, Karen. We don't care. We're executing Luigi Mangione. To be clear, this is a remarkably abbreviated timeline to assemble an appropriate mitigating package. However, so in other words, Karen's even saying, look, just asking for 3 months is not asking for much. We should have up to a year to do that. We're asking for the lowest amount that's normally done. Give us 3 months. Give us 3 months. That's all we're asking for. How about a fucking fair trial? Is that 15? I think it is. However, it was obvious to counsel that the government was eager to move Mangione's case forward. Counsel requested the minimal amount of time necessary to develop a meaningful mitigation package. So counsel reluctantly said, oh yeah, I guess give him a little bit of time to come up with a package, like the minimum, give him the minimum. The prosecutors did not agree to the request for 3 months. Rather, so they didn't even want to give him 3 months. Rather, on February 11th, the trial prosecutors told counsel in a phone call that additional mitigating submission would need to be submitted within 1 week. Here they go. Yeah, I know you want 3 months, and we told you couldn't last time because we were changing administration. Now we got a new administration, but you know what? You still only get 1 week. 1 week, bitch. If you don't see a bias to execute Luigi Mangione, despite the law that tells them that they need to slow their ass roll down, then I don't know what to say. Then on March 12th, the trial prosecutors stated in a phone call that a decision as to the death penalty would be reached without waiting for the defense to submit the mitigating information. Oh my God, dude. Oh my God. Literally, this is twice now they've done that. Hey, by the way, you got 1 week. You know what? We don't care. We're going forward anyways. Okay, now that the new administration comes in, you got 1 week. You know what? Fuck it. We're just going to go with it anyways. Okay, that's like 16. All right. I can't even believe we are having this discussion. What the hell is wrong with these people? And I swear, I hope a judge has the nuts, the cojones, the huevos, the balls, the stones, whatever that Judge Caro did, and does the right thing. I don't know that we have that many good judges in this country, but let's hope we do have one more good judge. Let's hope we have one more good judge. The Attorney General, April 5th, 2025 press release. This one is the one that got me kicked off of. This is the one I think that got me kicked off of TikTok for a while, or shut down. On the morning of April 1st, 2025, the Attorney General issued a press release attached as Exhibit 1. The title of the press release is Attorney General Pam Bondi directs prosecutors to seek the death penalty for Luigi Mangione. That was the title of it. In the release, the Attorney General wrote, quote, after careful consideration, careful my ass, after careful consideration, I have directed the federal prosecutors to seek the death penalty in this case as we carry out President Trump's agenda to stop violent crime and make America safe again. The Attorney General continued, as alleged, Luigi Mangione stalked and murdered United Healthcare executive Brian Thompson on December 4th, 2024. The murder was an act of political violence. Mangione's actions involved substantial planning and premeditation, and because the murder took place in public with bystanders nearby, may have posed a grave risk of death to additional persons. The Attorney General concluded the press release by stating that this is in line with the Attorney General Pam Bondi's Day 1 memo as Attorney General entitled Reviving the Federal Death Penalty and Lifting the Memorandum on the Federal Executions. Nowhere in there is the presumption of innocence. Now I'm going to finish this paragraph and then I'm going to back up to the footnote. The Attorney General's death penalty order and her factually misleading, prejudicial public statements were instant international news, immediately and widely reported all across the world on outlets, including the New York Times, the New York Post, the Wall Street Journal, BBC, Reuters, Associated Press, Al Jazeera, CNN, Fox News, Law.com, Guardian, Washington Post, CBS News, USA Today, Bloomberg, Los Angeles Times, Chicago Tribune, Politico, ABC News, and countless others. Everyone in the world heard Pam Bondi's telling you Luigi Mangione is a cold-blooded murderer and no presumption of innocence whatsoever. Footnote into this. Counsel for Mr. Mangione were first informed by newspaper reporters that the Attorney General had directed the line prosecutors at the Southern District of New York to seek the death penalty. Judging by the forthright nature of the lying prosecutors, had they known that the Attorney General had directed them to seek the death penalty, counsel believes they would have told us. In other words, Karen Agnifilo was being told by the Southern District of New York, we aren't going to seek the death penalty. Don't worry. We've got no direction to do so. And then Pam Bondi dropped the bomb saying, you will seek the death penalty. She's actually kind of cutting the Southern District of New York a little slack. She's saying, look, I think if they had known Pam Bondi was going to do that and direct them to seek the death penalty, they would have told me. So I kept the lid on it because they told me, don't worry about it. They probably didn't even know Pam Bondi was going to do that. So I'm going to cut them a little slack and say they didn't even know Pam Bondi was about to drop that bombshell. They did not tell the undersigned. Rather, counsel learned about it when the rest of the world did. The charges in the federal case do not involve political violence. This is her clarifying. The charges in the federal case do not involve political violence, but instead the stalking of a single person who is not a politician or a public servant or someone engaged in politics. The Attorney General misstated the statutory aggravating factor, which provides that the defendant knowingly created a grave risk of death to one or more persons in addition to the victim of the offense. She added the word may to the phrase, may have posed a grave risk to falsely convey that the aggravating factor applied when it did not. So even Pam Bondi didn't say he did endanger other lives. He may have endangered other lives. And she went ahead and used that as an aggravating factor. All right, we're long on this. Rather than authorizing the SDNY prosecutors to seek the death penalty in a non-public communication, so rather than authorizing them in a non-public communication, the Attorney General took the unprecedented action of directing them to do so via a press release, knowing that this death penalty investigation would be conducted by presenting evidence to a grand jury exposed to her press release before hearing any evidence. So Pam Bondi did this knowing a grand jury was being convened to decide whether Luigi Mangione is a murderer. And now she's telling everyone who could be on that grand jury, Luigi Mangione is a murderer. Before you go into deliberations to decide if Luigi Mangione is a murderer or willing to be charged with death, I'm telling you as the Attorney General, he is a murderer before you even step in there to think about it. In this release, she did not once say that Mr. Mangione had not been indicted for any federal crime or that there were mere allegations. She never once discussed the presumption of innocence or that Mr. Mangione is innocent until proven guilty. That's even though she's upholding the law and she doesn't even believe in the principle of innocent until proven guilty. She assured the country, including the grand jurors, that she, the nation's Attorney General, gave the matter careful consideration and that her expert opinion was, as the head of the Department of Justice and the nation's highest ranking law enforcement officer, that Mangione warranted execution. However, the Attorney General's press release was false in other respects, because when the defense asked for 3 months to conduct an abbreviated mitigation investigation and prepare a submission to the current administration's capital case section, that request was denied. So in fact, the Attorney General did not carefully consider the matter because her Justice Department refused to consider any mitigating evidence. You cannot say, I've carefully weighed both sides of this story. I will not listen to the other side's story. I've carefully weighed both sides of the story. You are talking out your ass. There you go. Yet, she falsely assured the country that the grand jurors she falsely assured the grand jurors that she had carefully weighed all the argument. In addition, he also called the incident an act of political violence, even though Mr. Mangione was charged in a complaint with stalking of a single person who is not a politician or an activist and who is not otherwise engaged in politics. Yet she's calling it an act of political violence to a grand jury. In addition to being legally false, it is illegal what she just said. In addition to being legally false and factually misleading, the Attorney General's press release is prejudicial for several reasons. First, the press release violates the Federal Rule of Criminal Procedure, 6E, because it discloses publicly that the Southern District of New York prosecutors and grand jury will be conducting an investigation with a view towards charging Mr. Mangione with death-eligible offenses. She further specified publicly the crime the grand jury would investigate, stalking and murder, and the two particular statutory factors that the grand jury would consider to vote a capital indictment. Publicly releasing details about a grand jury's investigation, such as the specific aggravating factors the grand jury would consider, violates the rule of grand jury secrecy. A grand jury is supposed to be convened in secret to deliberate in secret and render a verdict. She's telling all of America what the grand jury is going to decide. They're going to decide Luigi Mangione is guilty of aggravated murder because of these two reasons, and here's what they're going to do. Before they've even been doing their job, it's supposed to be secret. That's a violation of the Constitution. Jesus, how is she in charge of that, of the highest law in the land? Second, the press release provided a blueprint to the public and the grand jurors to indict Mangione with death penalty offenses based on two statutory aggravating factors that she expressly had outlined for the public. Not surprisingly, the grand jury followed her blueprint precisely and found the exact two aggravating factors that she told them to find. Oh my God, way to nail it, Karen. Karen said, Pam Bondi said, the two factors you need to find as a grand jury is this one and this one. And guess what? The grand jury came back with this one and this one. The same two she told them, you will go find these two findings. Third, the Attorney General's extrajudicial statements, including her personal opinion as to the merits of the case, including the fact that this was an appropriate case for capital punishment, is in violation of local criminal law rule 23.1. Oh my God, if you missed it, that was so beautiful. When Karen basically, in essence, told the judge, please make Pam Bondi write on a chalkboard over and over again, I will not violate, and I have read local criminal rule 23.1. Please make Pam Bondi put in writing that she has read criminal law 23.1. It was hilarious. It was as close as you're going to get to Karen Agnifilo saying, please make her write this 30 times on a chalkboard, and so that she knows that she's supposed to actually follow local criminal law 23.1. And I can't believe a judge actually did it. A judge actually said, Pam Bondi, you please acknowledge that you know what criminal law 23.1 is. Holy shit, that was awesome. It went over the heads of most Americans. Funny ass shit. Love it. Anyways, the Attorney General's Instagram post. Instagram, Pam Bondi's on Instagram. Yay! I'm kicked off TikTok, but she's on Instagram. Yay! All right. Shortly after the Attorney General's press release, the Attorney General launched an Instagram account. Shortly after her press release, she launches an Instagram account. The inaugural two posts of the Attorney General's new Instagram account were a photograph of the Attorney General standing before the seal of the United States Department of Justice and the following message: Luigi Mangione's murder of Brian Thompson, an innocent man and father of two children, was premeditated, cold-blooded assassination that shocked America. After careful consideration, not listening to the mitigating factors at all, I have directed the federal prosecutors to seek the death penalty in this case as we carry out President Trump's agenda to stop violent crime and make America safe again. Yay, Pam Bondi. Yet, by the way, you looked beautiful in that picture. You looked fantastically presidential behind that seal. You looked like $1 million. And you convinced of America that Luigi Mangione is a terrorist and a murderer of an innocent man, and convinced the grand jury also that you will indict him of this because he's the worst man in America. We need to put him to death. Good job. You looked great doing it. Before addressing the substance of the United States Attorney General's Instagram post, the fact that she created an Instagram account specifically to make extrajudicial statements about this grand jury investigation is further proof that her April 1st press release was to influence the public. That's the whole reason of making that Instagram account in that post. The Attorney General's Instagram content, like her press release, expressed her personal belief that Mangione was guilty of premeditated cold-blooded assassination. She again lied to the public that she had carefully considered the matter, even though she refused to permit the defense to present mitigating factors. She also again failed to state that Mr. Mangione had not been indicted or that he was presumed to be innocent, because the grand jury had not indicted Luigi Mangione yet. She's acting to America like it's a foregone conclusion. Luigi Mangione has already been called a murderer by a grand jury. It hadn't even happened yet. She reemphasized that the decision was based on politics, specifically the administration's agenda to make America safe again. As a final matter, because the Attorney General was explicitly discussing a matter being considered by a federal grand jury in this district, her public Instagram post violated Rule 6E. She's breaking the law. All right, we're getting close. We only got a couple more pages and then we'll be done. The Attorney General's televised appearance on Sunday, April 6, 2025. On Sunday, April 6, 2025, presumably after the grand jury investigation, after the grand jury investigation, she ordered 5 days earlier had begun. On Sunday, April 6th, presumably after the grand jury investigation she ordered 5 days earlier had begun, the Attorney General appeared on Fox News Sunday, where she made the most egregious and prejudicial statement about the case yet. Here we go. Concerning the Luigi Mangione case and her direction to prosecutors to seek the death penalty, she stated the following. The president's directive was very clear. We are to seek the death penalty when possible. It hadn't been done in 4 years. I was a capital prosecutor. I tried death penalty cases throughout my career. If there was ever a death case, this is one. This guy is charged with hunting down a CEO, a father of two, a married man, hunting him down and executing him. I feel like these young people have lost their way. I was receiving death threats for seeking the death penalty on someone who is charged with the execution of a CEO. Why the fuck does it even matter that he's a CEO? That's 17, I think. Why does it even matter that he's a CEO? Why would you mention that twice? Karen's going to beat her ass for that. Beat her ass badly, and I agree with it. She continues, we are going to continue to do the right thing. We are not going to be deterred by political motives. That's a joke. I can't continue her shit, but continuing, I've seen a protester walking down the street saying free Luigi. I mean, this guy is charged with a violent crime, and we're here to seek the death penalty wherever possible or whenever possible. Karen responds, the Attorney General's televised appearance went even further than her first two improper, prejudicial, and false public statements in that she explicitly leveraged her purported personal experience as a capital prosecutor and told the viewers and grand jurors that I was a capital prosecutor. I tried death penalty cases throughout my career, and if there was ever a death case, this is one. This statement alone is enough to prejudice the entirety of the case. The Attorney General of the United States is telling the public that based on her personal experience as a capital prosecutor who tried death penalty cases throughout her career, that Mangione is guilty and should be executed. That is a prejudicial statement from the largest pulpit of the world. The Attorney General told the public that Mangione hunted down and executed a CEO, a father, a married man. She then pivoted to her own experience as the Attorney General overseeing this very case. I was receiving death threats from seeking the death penalty for someone who is charged with an execution of a CEO. Karen responds, the Attorney General plainly said this to convey to that Mangione was aligned with dangerous people who would threaten the Attorney General, and that the death penalty was necessary to avenge the killing of a CEO of a large wealthy corporation. I'm losing my voice. How the hell am I going to do the 2 extra rants on this? She then assured the nation that despite being threatened in connection with the case, we are going to continue to do the right thing. We are not going to be deterred by political motives. She said this to establish her own moral rectitude in the face of threats from those supporting Mangione. She concluded this part of her remarks by telling the American public, or people, what doing the right thing means. We are going to seek the death penalty whenever possible. The Attorney General's televised statement 5 days after she ordered a grand jury's death penalty investigation to commence and 11 days before it returned its indictment is fatally prejudicial. She gave those statements while the grand jury was deciding what to do, whether to indict him. She emphasized publicly for the third time that her decision to seek the death penalty was based on the president's directive, specifically that the administration will seek the death penalty whenever possible. Worse, she then invoked her personal experience, saying that she was a capital prosecutor who tried the death penalty cases throughout her career, and that if there was ever a death case, this is one. According to the Attorney General, as stated during her televised appearance, she was motivated in part to seek the death penalty because of the alleged victim's status as a CEO. Yes, Karen Agnifilo repeats shit a lot. I've said that from the beginning, but I like it. I like it anyways. However, as the Attorney General should know, this is the great part. She keeps repeating he's a CEO. He's a CEO. He killed a CEO. The Attorney General should know there's no provision in the death penalty statute or the Department of Justice death penalty protocol which allows for consideration of a person's social, economic, or professional status of an alleged homicide victim in determining whether to seek the death penalty. Yet, the attorney explicitly considered exactly that when inviting the public and potential grand jurors to do the same, to consider the fact that he was a CEO as part of the important thing here. The Attorney General's pattern of public statements in perhaps the most high-profile murder case currently pending in the United States shows that the capital prosecution was brought unabashedly for political reasons, and that the victim's professional status as a CEO was relevant to her decision, and that she had no interest in considering mitigating factors or information. But perhaps most critically, the attorney's actions show both that she intended to improperly influence potential members of the grand jury pool and petit venir, that's the big pool of people who could become part of the grand jury, and that she continued to do so for an extended period of during the pendency of this case. And I think now we're on the last point. Why am I scrolling all the way down? Yes, we're on the last point. And then we're out of here for this video, and all the rest will probably be member or bonus material for members only, because I'm going to lose my voice anyways. The April 11th, 2025 emergency motion and the April 17th indictment. On April 11th, 2025, 5 days after the Attorney General's televised appearance and defense counsels filed motions with the court, recounting the Attorney General's pattern of damning, patently improper extrajudicial statements, and that the government refused to the counsel's request for 3 months to make mitigating presentation. The emergency motion sought a court order. So the emergency motion that Karen filed sought a court order precluding the government from seeking the death penalty. 2, directing that any proposed federal government grand jurors be screened for their exposure to Attorney General's public statements. 3, ensure that the Attorney General certify that she has read Local Rule 23.1, which they did make her do. And 4, restraining that the Attorney General from making more extrajudicial statements in violation of the Local Rule 23.1 that she violated, that could preclude or prejudice Mangione's right to a fair trial by a grand jury, including the grand jury's consideration of death-eligible offenses. This is a giant run-on sentence. Number 5, directing that the government to produce for in-camera inspection and memorandum documents, notes provided to the Attorney General as part of her careful consideration of evidence. So that's another thing that Karen did. Bless her heart. She said, oh, I want to see exactly how it is Pam Bondi carefully examined all the evidence, because she wouldn't even look at our documents, mitigating factors. She wouldn't even let us talk. So I want to know specifically, she pointed out in the writing, not here, but in the writings that she did earlier, hey, what members of the healthcare industry were writing to Pam Bondi? I want to know what members of the healthcare industry were writing to Pam Bondi saying, go after this MFer, go after him. Is that part of your careful consideration? I want to know who wrote to Pam Bondi and what was part of her careful consideration about executing Luigi Mangione, because he was a CEO of a health insurance company. To this day, I don't think they've actually done that part. And 6, directing the government to produce any emails, records, documents, memorandum, or notes of any communications between a government officials, and anyone advocating for the death sentence. So she wants to know who in government's advising Pam Bondi to go for the death penalty, like Trump or somebody else, or any particular sentence in this case by or on behalf of any business, corporate interest, lobbying interest, or the party. She wants to know what members of health insurance companies and the government is telling Pam Bondi her careful consideration to execute Luigi Mangione. This matter was assigned to Judge Eduardo Ramos. 3 days later, on April 14th, the government filed a response. So Karen said, you need to do all these things immediately, and then the government responded, in which it argued, among other things, that the appropriate manner to express counsel's arguments is before the district judge that is assigned to the matter after the incident. George Ramos was a temporary judge. It's not the official judge, because the official judge hasn't been appointed. So therefore, the argument in return to Karen's, all her objections were, hey, too early, wait until they've actually appointed a judge in this case. To the extent that the government responded to the counsel's request to screen the grand jurors for exposure to the grand jury's extrajudicial statements, the government characterized this request as the defense intruding into the grand jury's process and refused to provide any information as to whether and to what extent it screened its jurors. So Karen said, look, the grand jurors were prejudiced by hearing Pam Bondi's words, and you need to find out who heard what Pam Bondi said. And they said, you know what? A grand jury is convened in private, and you're not allowed to know what's going on at the grand jury. So denied. We're not going to, we tell the judge, don't listen to Karen Agnifilo. We have a right to be completely secret about this, and we don't have to tell her whether we vetted the jurors to see if they were prejudiced by her statement. I know it's a lot to unpack. 2 days later, on April 16th, the defense filed a reply to the prosecution, urging the court to take action under its supervisory authority over the grand jury, especially to the extent that Local Rule 23.1. So in other words, what she's saying is, Karen's insisting, judge, do the right thing. The Attorney General has prejudiced the grand jury. The rule that Pam Bondi violated is Local Rule 23.1, among other things. Make sure she understands that and do an investigation. They're asking. That's what Karen's asking. Explicitly as it applies to the grand jury investigation, potentially being prejudiced by inappropriate public statements. After the motion was filed, or fully briefed, but before Judge Ramos had issued a decision, the government indicted the case on April 17th. What does that mean? Before the judge even rules on whether or not Karen has an argument, they go ahead and indict Luigi Mangione for murder, and she still never got her mitigating circumstances, never got the it's illegal what you're doing, never got a halt to it. We're going to go ahead. We just announced we're going to execute him. Yep, we're going to execute him. We do not have to listen to Karen Agnifilo. F you. Government is moving forward to the full extent of the law. 2 more paragraphs and we're out of here. The indictment charges 4 counts. Count 3 charges murder through the use of a firearm during and relation to the crime of stalking, as charged in counts 1 and 2. As part of the allegations of count 3, the government charged 2 statutory aggravating factors: the grave risk and death, and that the offense was committed after substantial planning and premeditation. These 2 factors were the same ones the Attorney General spoke about in her press release from 16 days earlier. On April 24, 2025, the government filed a notice of intent to seek the death penalty, asserting that in the event of the conviction on count 3, the death sentence is justified by the 2 statutory aggravating factors listed in the indictment, as well as the 3 additional non-statutory aggravating factors, specifically victim impact, selection, site of site, and victim for the act of violence and further aggressions or dangerousness. Okay, and then it gets into the argument. I talked for an hour and a half and lost my voice just getting through her summary. If you do not know, after hearing the summary, if you do not have a reason of doubt to realize that the federal government overstepped and is overstepping to execute Luigi Mangione, I don't care how you feel about Luigi Mangione. If he's a murderer and you think he's a piece of shit and he needs to be put to death, do so with life in prison without the possibility of parole. That's the option you should have. What you shouldn't have is the execution of Luigi Mangione, violating every bit of his constitutional civil liberty rights and every single law you can think of, not allowing any kind of mitigating factors to be presented, having a grand jury be convened and make a decision based on Pam Bondi telling him he's a murderer before they even started their decision on whether or not he's a murderer. All of that shit, you just blew your case. You blew your case. Luigi Mangione should not be put to death. End of story. We should now have a case that has no first-degree murder in the state case and should be a second-degree murder case, and you should throw out the death penalty in the federal case. And as Karen started out the argument, maybe even toss the entire federal case. Will they do that latter? I doubt it. No way in hell the federal government's going to toss the entire case. But maybe if we have a judge with some stones, some huevos, some balls, some cojones, I think this judge might be female. I can't remember. Anyways, if we have a judge like Carl was in the first ruling, maybe we have a chance that the death penalty will be taken off the table. And again, how you feel about this matter, you can weigh in on the comments. You can tell me to pack sand. You can say I'm a horrible person. I'm vile. I'm disgusting for believing in the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. That's your right as an American to say so, but I disagree with you. Have a great day.